Thank you so much for joining us for Community Circles and Conversations. These continue to be really a wonderful time to pause and come together and just be supportive of one another and also dive a little bit deeper on some topics. So really appreciate your time and certainly your continued leadership throughout the community. I'm Angie Detlefs-Tretton. I serve as the Chief Community Impact Officer for the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines, and it truly is an honor to help support your work. And I am really thrilled this morning to have an exciting conversation teed up for you. And before I do the introduction officially to Roxanne Pals, our guest, I'm going to ask Barb to flip to the next slide and just want to set us in why we come together for community circles and conversations. The whole point of doing these is to really help build those trusting relationships and share knowledge and resources among and within the Central Iowa nonprofit sector. So you can be assured that every conversation is really focused on building trust and sharing knowledge and resources. Our expectations is that we really, center any conversation around these common goals. And we really want to be sure that we are rooted in equity and inclusion conversations. So appreciate your commitment to that as well. So again, housekeeping is a little different than other weeks. As I said, we would really invite you to keep your video on for both the presentation and the breakout, again, if you wish. So if you've done your hair, if you've put on your lipstick, you're welcome to keep your video on. And even if you haven't, you're welcome to keep your video on. So we'd love to see faces this morning. Barb, I'm going to ask you to move to the next slide. Thank you so much. A couple of real quick announcements and updates. Many of you have seen the announcements about the Community Foundation grants programs. So our leadership grants, we have our second round of our letters are due on April 14th already, which I hear is next week. So if you'd like to have a conversation, please reach out to us and we'll get time scheduled to talk about leadership grants. Also wanted to remind you that April 20th, we have our onboard, the basics of effective board members, a training session. So we'll send follow-up information about that if you or others are interested in joining that. And I wanted to pause here this morning and just be sure that you all knew that we have a new colleague at the Community Foundation who has joined us as our Director of Community Impact. And Cameron Middlebrooks will be someone that you will hopefully get to know and get to meet here in the weeks and months ahead. Cam is officially on day 5, and we are thrilled to have him involved. He will be overseeing our grant making programs and participating in a lot of our community leadership work throughout Central Iowa. And then the last thing for you all to know, we do have a couple of position openings at the foundation, and I'm really pleased that we will be having a director of nonprofit relations role, as well as a senior accountant on our team. Many of you might know we do a lot of work with our nonprofit accounting services for nonprofit partners throughout the community, and so excited to bring on a senior accountant to help with that work as well. So let's see. I think with that, Barb, if you could move us to the next slide, that would be great. And today, our conversation is really going to be centered around from moving from disruption to flourishing, and how leading human-centered change can be so powerful, both for you as an individual leader, but also for your organizations and for the staff members that you serve. So I am thrilled that my path and the Community Foundation's path has crossed with Roxanne Pals. Just recently have gotten to know her, and I'm really excited for her to engage more in the Central Iowa community. I believe she's been here about 5 years, and her world keeps getting smaller and more connected. And my response was, welcome to Central Iowa. And we're so glad that she's in Des Moines. So Roxanne, really, I would describe her as a human-centered change architect. What I understand about her work is she's really focused on helping to co-create with leaders the space and the conditions in order for people to really flourish, especially at times of transition disruption. And then one of the most interesting things to me about Roxanne is the varied experience she's had, starting as a nurse and healthcare leadership. She's worked in the aviation space, she's been in finance, she's been in public utilities, she's been in government. But through all of that work, really the value of people in implementing good solutions at all times, but in particular in times of disruption. So with that, I am going to invite Roxanne to join us here on video, and she's going to walk us through some strategies and some things to think about at this time. And then we're going to do a little bit different this morning. We're going to break into small groups for some reflection and conversation, and then we're going to come back for a debrief with Roxanne a little bit. So shaking it up a little bit on this Wednesday morning, but really appreciate you being along for the ride. So with that, Roxanne, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and we're eager to learn more from you about how we can move forward.
Great. Thank you, Angie. And I know that Barb is back there, right? Supporting this whole thing. So thank you, Barb, as you do that for us. And thanks to all of you for joining us this morning. It's an amazing opportunity, as Angie was sharing, about how this space came to be and when it was kind of brought into reality around April and the pandemic and everything we were facing in 2020. And so just the foresight of you all to know that leaders need a place to be together where it's safe to have these conversations that are really needed in the midst of the disruptive change we've experienced together in 2020. So I just thought I'd take a moment to give you a sense of who I am and how I enter the world of work through these different lenses, because people get confused. Like my family gets confused between what is this thing we call 3 Consulting and how does it connect with this thing we call Trilogy Change Collaborative. So 3 Consulting is my private practice. As Angie said, I am a culture and change strategist. How in the world did a nurse leader get from leading people to a corporate role in creating a function around culture and change and engagement? So I'll tell you just the quick story of that. It was in the early 2000s, probably late, I'm dating myself now, but I was asked to take on a leadership role that I thought was interim. And it really was, how do we address the needs of the people in the worst performing nursing unit across a not-for-profit national healthcare system in the midst of a huge disruptive change, which was transitioning from paper medical record to electronic medical record. Some of you have probably had an experience like that. So this was the early 2000s. We prepared for that for over 2 years. And then the flip of the switch happened, right? And what I noticed is that even with all of that preparation and training and process improvement and mapping from past to future, what I noticed is that when we flipped the switch and people really had to do that, there was a ton of what I just call human suffering. We saw everything from stress and anxiety that kept people from coming to work to, people who were grinding their teeth at night and broke teeth off. I mean, I don't want to be melodramatic, right? But I just experienced things that brought a lot of questions for me as a nurse leader. So I did this work internally for this health system for years, and then opened my own practice in 2013. And that's known as 3 Consulting. Most of this work happens internal with organizations, internal with communities, in a coaching, facilitating, teaching, convening role. So with that, you can move past that slide and move into the next slide, which is really our attempt to take what we've learned over 20 plus years and put it into a format in which any leader, no matter where they are in the world, if they're leading humans, that involves change. we have created this, this platform. It's a leadership formation program, and it really is intended to offer and teach what we've learned outside of normal corporate and community relationships with 3 Consulting. So that's what you're seeing here. It's Trilogy Change Collaborative. From disruption to flourishing, how do you then as a leader pay attention to humans in change? So you can buzz past that as well. And I want to take just a moment. You can advance the slide. So just recently, someone I've worked with for years, so this was an aha for me, introduced me to a group that I was speaking to on another topic, but of course, humans and change. And the person who's known me a long time said, yeah, Rox does this thing around human-centered change and we don't really get it, but she's going to talk to us about it. I'm like, oh my gosh, if you don't know, then I have some further opportunity, right, to really have a picture of what do we mean by this. So human-centered change is all about leading 2 seemingly polarized parts of change and integrating them in a way that pays attention to not only the change itself, like what is happening, very tangible, very like flip the switch, you're moving to a whole new medical record platform. The change is the event that you're preparing for. The transition is the internal psychological process. So human-centered change is knowing that it's both and, right? So how do we manage this big event of change and understand that once the old ends, that's when the transition begins. And it's very predictable. Lots of science behind it. Won't go into that today, but just know that transitions, the psychological process for people starts with the ending of the old. So with that, I think you can move past this slide. And if you'd love to, like, if you just can't stand not knowing more about managing transitions, leading humans in change, this author, William Bridges, he is now dead. This work goes back at least 30 years, maybe 40. All of this work is in public domain. Just Google William Bridges. However, if you like to read a book, almost no one reads books anymore, but if you do, the book is called Managing Transitions, and it's a really easy read. It's digestible, even if you don't practice change architecture, and it just gives really super great hints that you can apply almost immediately after you read the book. So this is his model, one form of his model. And basically from 30 years ago, right, this idea, if you start at the left, and you see he starts with the human side of change, and you see this big slope or this curve. Sometimes we refer to it as kind of a sledding slope, right? Something is ending. You see the little person with the rain and the cloud, and something is ending. And all of these, people describe it as uncertainty and chaos. I don't know my role anymore. Will I have a job when this is over? I used to be really good at this and now I don't know what I'm doing. This is how Bridges describes transitions. And this neutral zone, if you see that, is really a state of limbo. And this is where the confusion, the uncertainty, the unpredictability, people are anxious, they often don't sleep. I mean, there's all these dynamics, right? And I'm sure you recognize this place. And then as you learn the new, yay, we're there. Well, this was true, I think, 30 years ago. I was teaching this version of this model and applying it in my work 15 years ago. If you go to the next slide, this is the space in which we currently work, and I think is descriptive of 2020. And from my perspective, showing us the reality of what the future is going to be in terms of disruptive change. So I used to have trouble explaining what do we mean by disruptive change? You know, that whole piece around transformative change where, you know, we completely have to shift our mindset. We have to learn completely different skills. We have to get comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty and all of that. I've been working in that space for a long time. And probably around maybe, I don't know, 8 years ago, I started really watching the work of the World Economic Forum, and some of you have probably heard of that work. But they were writing and predicting that these mega trends that have come to us through digitalization, that have impacted the way biology and medicine works, and the way manufacturing works with automation and artificial intelligence and all of those things. You know, they talk about 5 mega trends. And that level of disruption is our norm. And 2020 showed us on a global scale what disruptive change feels like. And if you think about, you know, we were in an economic crisis, we were in a health crisis, we were in a social justice crisis, you know, name it, we were in a political crisis. And so what makes disruptive change transition different is that it really impacts people. This is what it looks and feels like. And if you think about your own experience, if you think about those you serve, as I think, I don't know all of you, right? And the not-for-profit areas you come from and leading in that space. But what happens often is I'm leading this kind of change and I'm experiencing it. So this is the I think new normal that people are becoming aware of the transitions we are and will continue to experience, and the magnitude of the implications for humans. And let me just take a moment and say, and people get like, oh my gosh, there she is again, she's over dramatic. In this space, there is human suffering. Let's just call it what it is, right? There is suffering. And we know there's always been suffering, right? But to have it at this level with everything that encompasses a human life on a global scale, I think the beauty of this is that we're awake in a way that we weren't at the end of 2019. I think, and this is the part, right, where, well, you'll get into conversations and I can't wait to hear from you. So anyway, this now, from our perspective, has been happening about 8 years, and now people see it, right? So the next slide and experience.
Hey Roxanne, before we move on, would you mind just help like walking people through? I'm intrigued by this idea of there's this moment, there's this at the very far left here of the screen.
Yeah.
But for those that maybe can't see quite as well, could you just walk through like what is that curve like? And then my second question is really around, you know, I think we're in this really interesting time, and certainly when we lean into the conversation around equity in our community, I think sometimes folks are struggling with this whole notion of, oh, I can't wait to return to normal, and realizing that normal is not a place that was a good spot to be for many of our neighbors and those that we work with, and even for many of us. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, what are those steps? And then what does it look like when you sort of are compounding? You've got so many different starting points at the exact same moment. Any reflections that you can help us think through as leaders?
Absolutely. Somebody be watching the time, right? This is my life's work. So, so what is different now? And I have absolutely experienced this personally and professionally since the late 1990s. It used to be that we had one transformative change happening at one time, right? So in 2003, when I was leading, humans through a change like paper to electronic or digital, that was huge. Like everything had to change. The way I think about how I practice, the way I really practice, the way I interact with, everything was changing. And change triggers fear in the brain. And all kinds of brain science can support this now, right? In a way that we didn't really know in the late 90s. So the reason I think the slope looked like a sledding hill way back then is because one transformative change was happening at a time. And the implication is still the same. But as humans, the ability and the readiness to be resilient through one at a time is more reasonable, right? It's still a psychological process. It still creates anxiety and fear and unknowing and all of this stuff. But it's not as dramatic, frankly. What you see in front of you now is exactly what Angie's describing, which is transformative change over transformative change over transformative change with multiple endings. You see that maybe was intuitive to you, Angie, right? That this idea that there's oh my God, there's another one. Whoops, there's another. And so the humans really don't have kind of that resting phase. And so resiliency becomes even more critical. And what we teach in human-centered change, and why we talk about from disruption to flourishing, is there is a whole body of work for how do you tend this transition for humans? What are the ways in which leaders can intentionally set up ways of working and ways of interacting with your people? And if you want to learn more about that, happy to spend some time with you offline. But we have something, what we call the 9 core elements of flourishing, and it's based on the work of Martin Seligman, the father of positive psychology. And what you're trying to do as a leader is you are trying to kind of squish, you're trying to kind of put pressure on the big spikes, right? Leading humans in this psychological process is as important as paying attention to the project plan of the change event. And in this case, you are likely leading multiple changes at the same time in work, in community. And now you overlay that with disruption of the totality of the human experience, socially, community, family, health. If any of you know much about the social determinants of health, right? That holistic view of human well-being has been impacted. And so 2020 shows us that reality, and it may not be that dramatic as we move forward, but transformative change over transformative change, which is what we call disruptive change, is ahead of us. It's with us, it's here. And having the strategies and the solutions is critical.
Well, and I'm noticing a comment in the chat about, this idea that things aren't just going to snap back like a rubber band, and it's really what can leaders do to help bridge and work with the individuals that are part of our organizations and community to really build a bridge to this newly envisioned future. But knowing that there's been such a compounded level of human experience,
yes.
Certainly joys for some during this time,
Absolutely.
but layered in a different way than maybe we've expected.
Yeah, and I think you just mentioned something that that I have not talked about, which is internal psychological process around change or transition isn't always negative, right? You get married, you're not single anymore, and you move into this period of, oh my God, who cleans? You want to have a baby and you plan for that and you think you're ready, and then you bring the baby home and you go, what just happened here, right? So I don't want to give the impression that this is only a negative experience. It is not. And in this, what kind of looks like ventricular fibrillation to me, in this place, if well tended for the humans, is the place of creativity and innovation. This is the place. So you will hear people say about 2020, oh my gosh, there's so many things we've learned. I hope we don't go back to the way it used to be in some of what we've learned, right? So this is the place where, with intention and simple tools and leaders who are aware of how to do this, creativity and innovation happens. Mm-hmm.
And we'll send this out too, so that you can see the close-up of some of the, the commentary, and, I think some really good tactical things. Certainly, the past year you've all been navigating through, but as we know, it'll continue, and just some good solid reminders about, communicating the reasons for the change in multiple channels. So some of those are outlined on this, this visual as well. So we can send that out, Roxanne.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. All right. So the next slide, and I want to just be mindful of the time, Angie. So you'll say, right, like it's time to go into breakout.
Yep, you're great.
Okay.
Keep
Okay.
going.
All right. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about compassion and empathy, and this is all. It's one of those spaces where people mix meaning, and it's not because there is a lack of, it's just what happens in social dynamic, right? Is that someone uses the word compassion and then you do, and you do, and you do. And we kind of lose the meaning. So I want to just talk about sympathy, empathy, and compassion just in like 30 seconds. So sympathy is when I see your suffering and I enter into your story because I have the same history. And it's hard for me to move out of. We kind of get into each other's story and we stay there. Empathy is, I see you, I feel, I think, or recognize what you're feeling, and I can remain separate and still caring, right? That's empathy. Compassion is always related to suffering, always. Empathy may not be. It is in our brains and bodies. So when people say, oh, I'm not a compassionate person, that's not true. It's in our brains and bodies, and it can be, it can be built like a muscle. Yep, I got a muscle. It just doesn't have to be built right now. It has an enormous power of bonding, creating trusting relationships and healthy community, whether that's community of family, community of organization, community of community, right? So this idea that it deepens and strengthens human to human dynamic. And the most potent form, which is free, is in the moment presence and attention on purpose, totally focused and quieting your own brain so you can be available to other. So compassion is there's one significant difference that I think you'll recognize. Compassion is, I see you, I think I feel you, I can make meaning, I think, of what your experience is like because I'm really listening. And I am compelled to do something. So it's the action. So you can be empathetic and go, oh, man, that's terrible. I can't even believe that happens. And you'll hear people right now calling for action. Like, we've heard this before. You're empathetic. Do something, right? So move into action, and that's compassion. All right, so let's move. And again, if anyone wants to talk to me further about any of this, I'm an email away. All right. Next slide. So suffering is everywhere. The Buddha says life is suffering, okay? Suffering is everywhere. It's the human dynamic. And there's really great work out there by Jane Dutton and Monica Warline at the University of Michigan. I won't go into too much. This book is, and their research is pretty consumable. I mean, they do lots of free stuff online, and check out their work. But basically what they're saying is, hey, workplace, hey, community, wake up. Suffering is everywhere, and it is costing you and us human capability, because our brains and our bodies and our hearts and our minds are suffering, and we just have a very different level of ability, capability, capacity to do the work at hand. And this is no surprise to you all. I'm guessing that this is your everyday life. And I think more than many things about 2020, but what I can say with confidence is the transition disruptive change experience for some of our community members is the norm and has been for a long time. And I think you serve on that edge, right? I mean, I'm making a lot of assumptions right now, but I want to tell you from my experience working with not-for-profits, being in not-for-profit healthcare, managing mission and margin and all that stuff. The reality is you see this suffering every day. And what they're saying, what Jane and Monica are saying is there is an economic cost, and we better start paying attention to that. I just had one more thought, but it'll come back. It'll come back. Some of you have heard of compassion fatigue. It is a whole nother topic. Be happy to do a group conversation around compassion fatigue. My sense is, and I know from working in that space right now in the healthcare industry, this is at a level that we have never seen before. And it is the phenomenon that if I'm in that intersection of suffering and compassion for my work, and I continually see it day after day after day, I actually can move out of my normal state of resiliency with that and move into stress and burnout. Really significant stuff. I just saw a behavioral health professional on the news last night, believe it or not, from Unity Point saying, this is what we're seeing in our data. 49% of people who are expecting to return to work are having significant anxiety and depression, panic attacks. This is the reality, right? They're again now, they're facing a major transition, and they are having psychosocial body, mind, spirit symptoms. So again, this is your world, right? You've got seemingly a foot in both worlds, at least, if not more integrated than that. All right, so let's move forward to the next slide. This, I want to just quickly refer to this because you're going to practice this, right? And I suspect you'll experience a very similar experience with practicing this as most humans do. So we listen at very different levels, and it really matters how quiet we can make our brain. This is the attention and presence, right? So you will recognize all of these different levels. It's not that any of them are wrong. Sometimes you want to listen at these different levels, and sometimes it's not appropriate, right? So it's about choice, but it's about being completely present to the moment so that you can make choice around which level. So the not listening, sometimes appropriate, tuning out everything. There's construction going on right there. And I've done a pretty good job so far of completely blocking that out, right? Listening to fool, you've been here, you've probably done it, you've experienced it, where people go, yep. And you know, they are somewhere else. They might be in the room, their body, but they're not with you. Listening to agree or disagree. You listen a little bit more. You see how you listen a little bit more with each level, but you're just waiting to jump in and go, not my experience. Nope. And this is a common kind of debate style, right? And it has its value. Listening to understand. You're listening more and you're kind of hearing, I kind of get it. I think I get it. Really important. Has its place. We're going to try to listen at the level of empathy. This is listening beyond the words. You hear the words and you see the nonverbal. You are connecting from a feeling perspective, right? That empathy thing. I see you. I think I feel what you're feeling. I think I see your perspective. And it, I am sensing the emotion of it, the feeling of it. Tuning into the needs of others. So this is step one. You can't be compassionate if you can't listen for empathy. Listen and be empathetic. So we're going to practice in the breakout sessions, listening for empathy. All right. So if you can move to the next slide, visuals are powerful. This is the Chinese character for to listen. It's called Ting, T-I-N-G. Again, public, head on out there, check this out. But we use this as a really powerful image to help people, just be reminded that there are moments where empathetic listening is absolutely what's needed. So this character, if you look at the left, this character is saying, listen with 10 ears. There's a 10 over here in this character. Listen, if you move over to the right now, you are listening with your eyes. If you go down now, you'll see something that looks a little bit like a crown, and it says undivided attention. What's happening in this character right here is listening as if they were royalty. This is listening with reverence. And then the bottom is listening with heart. So this is a heart-to-heart connection that this character says. All of those need to be a part of it to really listen with empathy. All right, so if you move to the next slide, and again, we're just going to try to practice in small group. And Angie, maybe you want to introduce small group. I'll introduce the process, or vice versa, however you want to talk about this.
Sure. So what we thought we'd do today is Roxanne has sort of an exercise for us. And so we are going to automatically break you into small groups, just in groups of 3 or 4 individuals to walk through this and connect with one another. So you will see Barb inviting you to join there. And Roxanne, you can go ahead and give the instruction pieces.
Sure. We're going to give you about 10 minutes. I think, are we still on track for that, Angie? In your breakout rooms, and depending on the number of people that you find yourself in, one person is sharing around the question, what's been the most challenging for you over the last 18 months? Your perspective, you sharing a story, for me, this has been the most challenging. The rest of you in that breakout group, that small group, are going to be listening for empathy, listening with empathy. And you will find yourself wanting to jump in and fix. You will find yourself wanting to go, oh my gosh, I had that experience too. You will find, just the way our brains are wired. So again, this is just about noticing and practicing. It's really that simple. So one person is going to share a story. The rest of you are going to listen. Then I would love for you to at least once, and hopefully twice if you've got the right number of people or the time, for you to rotate that role. Somebody else shares what was most challenging for them. The others listen for empathy. There's one more slide I want to share, and I'm just going to touch on it. You will have all of this, right? So you can go back and listen. But really, Dutton and Warline, Jane and Monica teach lots of great tools in their book. But basically, they talk about compassion as an active process, obviously, but they put it into 4 easy steps, right? As you're learning, as you're practicing, and noticing. So the first thing they say is notice, like be present enough that you notice. Whew, that feels like suffering. And then try to make meaning. And the meaning comes from listening from that place of empathy, asking those deeper questions that are about uncovering more instead of directing people to a different place, right? Feeling that empathetic concern, and last but not least, do something. And often, sometimes people don't know, right? Like if you say, is there something I can do? They won't necessarily know. And you, in your training and what you do in your humanity, you'll know that there's something you can do. So with that,
Great.
Thank you for having me, and the very important work you're all doing.
Well, thanks, Roxanne. We sure appreciate you sharing some insight. And again, I'll reiterate what I said at the beginning. Certainly feel fortunate that our paths have crossed, and glad to have you in Central Iowa. I think these are really important conversations, and especially with the compounded reality that we have found ourselves in and that we're still in. I think these are excellent reminders for us as leaders, as parents, as colleagues, as friends, and I really appreciate that. Barb, last slide, I think just really just reminder again, April 20th, we have our onboard session. If you have anyone that you think would benefit from participating in that. And then our next community circles will be on May 5th. It is, oh my goodness, springtime. Thank goodness for that. So again, thanks for being here today. We will send out follow-up information, and hopefully some of these reflections and ideas are helpful to you as you move forward. Thanks everyone. Thanks again, Roxanne. Have a wonderful week and enjoy the sun. Bye you all.
Bye.